In the summer of 1990, the peaceful college town of Gainesville, Florida became the setting for a series of brutal attacks that would shock the nation and inspire the Scream slasher franchise. This is the story of Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper. Danny Rolling, who would go on to commit at least 8 brutal homicides, had a miserable early life like so many of the people who end up doing what he did. Born on May 26, 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana, Rolling endured severe physical and emotional abuse from his father, a police officer from the time he was an infant. This abuse would leave deep psychological scars that very likely contributed to his violent tendencies. Perhaps because of her abusive husband, Danny's mother was prone to self-harm. By the age of 15, Rolling was already showing signs of instability. He struggled with addiction and spent time in and out of jail for various offenses, including robbery and peeping into women's houses. But it was in late 1989 that his darkest impulses would manifest in the most horrifying way. In the meantime, he joined the Air Force in 1971, though he would spend just a year in the service. Even while he was in the military, Rolling continued to use narcotics, which led him to get demoted, and eventually he was given an honorable discharge, citing a personality disorder, which seems quite generous. A year later, he was married to a young woman who he would have a daughter with, and for a while it seemed like he had turned the corner, working multiple jobs to support his wife and child. But the strain wore him down, and as he started drinking and smoking more and more, he became increasingly erratic and violent. After just 4 years, the couple would divorce and Danny began committing robberies, which would eventually land him in prison more than once until his final release before the Gainesville crime spree in 1988. Rolling had a reputation for being unsettling among his friends and acquaintances. One woman, named Cindy Jurassic, said that he often made disturbing statements, and he had even told her husband that he liked to stick knives in people. Perhaps this was shortly before or after what he did to the Grissom family on November 4, 1989. Tom Grissom, his daughter Julie, and grandson Sean were getting ready for dinner when an intruder forced his way into their home and attacked them. Neighbors would find a horrific display of violence when they went to check on the Grissoms the following day. Tom was slumped against the laundry room door with several stab wounds to the back and chest. Young Sean had been stabbed once in the back with such force that the blade had come through and out his chest. The attacker had spent more time with Julie. She was found in the bedroom, and the assailant had stabbed her 3 times in the back, but laid her face up on the bed. Bizarrely, he had also wiped Julie's body down with vinegar before fleeing the scene. These were the first known victims of Danny Rolling, and he would soon travel to Gainesville. He had told acquaintances that one day, I'm going to leave this town and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful, and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day. Rolling made a camp in the woods of Gainesville, near the student housing for the University of Florida. He would spend his time recording music that he wrote, some of which can still be found today. But he would also be committing various robberies and thefts around the area. Soon, when his darker impulses took control, he would use the woods to approach his targets' homes, entering through the back door unseen from the street. Rolling's reign of terror in Gainesville would start on August 24, 1990, when he broke into the apartment of college freshman Sonja Larson and her roommate Christina Powell. Armed with a K-bar knife and a pistol, he scouted out the home before brutally attacking them. He crept in and saw Christina asleep on the couch and briefly watched her before going upstairs where Sonja was asleep in her bedroom. Rolling actually stood there and debated for a moment which of the 2 girls that he preferred, and chose Christina. He attacked, slapping duct tape over Sonja's mouth, then stuck her with the 10-inch fighting knife. She instantly woke up and began fighting for her life, receiving wounds to her arms and thigh, which caused her to lose consciousness in roughly 1 minute. Somehow Rolling was able to keep the tape over Sonja's mouth, and Christina was still asleep downstairs, who he then approached. As with Sonja, he slapped duct tape over Christina's mouth, then taped her hands behind her back. Rolling then mistreated Christina in the worst possible ways, before eventually having her lay face down and plunging his knife into her back 5 times. Before he left the apartment, Rolling posed the bodies into graphic positions to shock whoever found them and add one final bit of disrespect. The next night, Rolling struck again. This time, his victim was a college student named Christa Hoyt, who he had been watching through the windows for days. On the night of August 25th, he broke into her apartment just 2 miles from the scene of his first attack. Using a screwdriver to pry open a sliding door, Danny waited in the apartment for Hoyt to return home. When she walked in, he ambushed her with his weapons and taped her mouth and hands, then forced her into the bedroom. After violating Christa, Rolling would follow the same procedure as he had with Christina, destroying her aorta in the process. Once again, Rolling would pose his victim, but he went a step further and also removed her head and put it on a shelf before retreating back to his hideout in the woods. 2 days later at 3 a.m. on August 27th, Rolling targeted Tracy Powell and Manny Taboada. Breaking into their apartment, Rolling entered Taboada's bedroom first and stuck him in the chest with his K-bar. Manny jolted awake and began trying to fight off his attacker, receiving wounds to his face, arms, and legs. Tracy heard the commotion and tried to barricade herself in her room, but Rolling was able to break through the door. She met the same fate as the prior victims and was left in a horrifying pose. The community was gripped with fear. Students fled the town and police worked around the clock to catch the culprit behind these vicious attacks, but somehow Danny Rolling evaded capture, leaving little evidence behind at the crime scenes. Before the investigators zeroed in on Rolling, a troubled young man named Ed Humphrey was considered their top suspect. Ed suffered from mental health issues and had been arrested after assaulting his grandmother. His fellow students at the University of Florida said that he was strange, wearing military-style clothing, and that he had an obsession with knives. In addition to being reported by students, Ed also fit the vague profile that the FBI had made, and so he was held as the crimes were investigated. Meanwhile, Cindy Jurassic had heard the reports on what happened in Gainesville as she traveled the Florida Panhandle. She immediately thought of Rolling and called the Crime Stoppers hotline and told them to look into him as a suspect. On September 7, 1990, Rolling was arrested, but not for the homicides. He was caught during a botched burglary in Ocala, Florida. It wasn't until January 1991 that investigators linked him to the Gainesville crimes through DNA evidence that was found at the crime scenes. Rolling's trial began in 1994. He initially pled not guilty, but later changed his plea to guilty, sparing the victims' families from a lengthy trial. In a shocking confession, Rolling revealed the details of his homicides, claiming that he was driven by an alter ego named Gemini. Two psychiatrists would testify to the court that while Rolling did have a severe personality disorder, he was fully aware of what he was doing and that it was wrong. On April 20, 1994, Danny Rolling was sentenced to be executed for the 5 lives he took in Gainesville. He would spend the next 12 years on death row, during which time he confessed to additional crimes, including the triple homicide of the Grissom family in Shreveport, Louisiana, that took place in 1989. On October 25, 2006, Danny Rolling was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was lobster tail, shrimp, and strawberry shortcake, all washed down with sweet tea. He would also sing a gospel hymn before receiving the needle, closing the book on the Gainesville Ripper.
Jingle spurs rolling into town. Ooh, black stallion, you bring a grim reaper. Dressed in snake hide, worn black leather. Mystery rider, what's your name? You're a killer, a drifter gone insane. Mystery rider, what's your game? You're a rebel, no one can tame. Welcome, stranger, to the Silver Dollar Ball. What's your pleasure? Pass the tender with a big cigar. Give me a whiskey, 'cause I'm a feeling a little risky. If that 10 stars in town, well, you tell him I'm around. out on a windy, lonely street. Two slinging 44s were how they finally meet. Fast as lightning, the two men will they draw. The outlaw he was the last thing you ever saw.